Hi everyone! I wanted to record a little video preface before my presentation just to introduce myself, put a face to a name, and tell you a little bit about the premise of my presentation. I'm Vivian Haggerty, a rising senior and Homeland and National Security Studies major, and I really enjoyed this class and discussing these important topics with you all. My presentation discusses the relationship between Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and al-Qaeda, and really, Zarqawi did not engage in Sunni extremism with the ultimate goal of joining al-Qaeda. Rather, for much of his tenure, he did everything in his power to remain independent of the organization. When he finally pledged bayat to bin Laden in 2004, rather than enter into a true partnership, the two men engaged in a mutually convenient transactional relationship. This relationship proved necessary when both groups' disparate causes, the fight against the near enemy and the far enemy, coalesced when the United States-led coalition invaded Iraq. However, the two leaders' expectations for how the alliance should work did not line up. Their ideological differences, combined with Zarqawi's need for autonomy, left the control-seeking bin Laden and Zawahiri frustrated. It was only after Zarqawi's death that bin Laden achieved even some manner of control over Zarqawi's al-Qaeda in Iraq, and this control was subsequently lost after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi came to power in 2010. So, without further ado, I'll begin my presentation. Thank you all for watching. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's relationship with Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda Corps, or AQC, was fraught from the very beginning. The two leaders had different goals and aspirations for their jihad, and the biggest differences can be boiled down to two factors. First, the ongoing debate between targeting the near enemy or the far enemy, and second, their position on targeting other Muslims, namely the Shia population. On the first point, in his 1996 fatwa, bin Laden laid out his intentions to target Americans, or the far enemy, and cashed in on this promise with the attacks on September 11, 2001. Bin Laden, while favoring the Sunni population, refrained from targeting the Shia for fear of alienating the potential recruits. Zarqawi, on the other hand, endeavored to fight the so-called apostate regimes of the Middle East, in other words, those he believed were run by infidels and propped up by the West. Additionally, he openly targeted Shia civilians with his brutal tactics, losing him massive amounts of public support and even engendering the infamous admonishing letter from Zawahiri in 2006. Following the United States-led coalition invasion of Iraq in 2003, these two larger aims, combating the near enemy or the far enemy, were combined into one chaotic situation. Bin Laden used the presence of U.S. troops on the ground to support his claims that the U.S. was at war with all Muslims, supporting his far enemy narrative. This served Zarqawi's purposes as well, as the invasion proved that the Iraqi government was merely a puppet of the United States. Given this convergence of two seemingly disparate and at times opposing goals, both bin Laden and Zarqawi deemed a partnership beneficial. Viewed in the context of al-Qaeda's well-known affiliate structure, seeing this partnership can lead to a misunderstanding of the true nature of their relationship. Rather than a highly integrated Iraqi franchise stemming from al-Qaeda Corps, al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI, was a creation of convenience, part of the larger organization in name only. Born in Zarqa, Jordan in 1966, Ahmed Fadl al-Khalayla did not have an auspicious start as a military or religious leader. Later taking his nom de guerre from his birthplace and restyling himself as Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, this man would go on to head several jihadist organizations, most famously al-Qaeda in Iraq. Most of his adolescence was spent with little inclination towards religion. After the death of his father, Zarqawi engaged in drinking, was referred to by some as a thug, and abandoned his education. Around the age of 18, he was arrested for drug possession and sexual assault, among other offenses. A body of open-source reporting indicates that Zarqawi was first radicalized during this stint in prison, exacerbated by time he spent in a religious school at Al-Hussein ben Ali Mosque shortly after his release in 1988. By 1989, Zarqawi had determined that he was ready to turn words into action and traveled to Afghanistan to take part in the anti-Soviet jihad. As did so many who were drawn by the success of the Afghan Mujahideen, he arrived as the Soviets had already begun to withdraw, too late to participate in much fighting. However, the cachet of having been in Afghanistan in 1989 was invaluable, as were the al-Qaeda contacts he made in Peshawar. One such contact was his future spiritual mentor, Sheikh Abu Muhammad al-Makdisi, with whom he founded Bayat al-Imam upon their return to Jordan in 1992 or 1993. The two planned a botched suicide bombing targeting a local movie theater in 1993, and both were arrested in 1994 for directing a vocally anti-government, illegal jihadist group, as well as possessing illegal weapons. After building a following in prison, Zarqawi serving as enforcer and Makdisi as spiritual advisor, the two were released in 1999 under general amnesty granted by King Abdullah II. Fearful that his ever-increasing involvement in terrorism would send him back to prison, Zarqawi made his way back to Afghanistan, where he met but did not pledge allegiance to bin Laden. Osama bin Laden first heard of Zarqawi by reading several of the Jordanians' religious tracts online, which were published during his second stint in prison. Yet, it is reported that their first meeting did not go well. Upon Zarqawi's arrival in Afghanistan, bin Laden remained wary of him for fear that the former prisoner had been recruited by the Jordanian General Intelligence Department. Reportedly, the disagreement between bin Laden and Zarqawi rested on the latter's focus on the near enemy, as well as his outspoken hatred for Shia Muslims. Additionally, Zarqawi was open in criticizing al-Qaeda, and bin Laden disliked the loud and tattooed man's swagger. Saif al-Adil, a senior al-Qaeda leader who would prove to be one of Zarqawi's allies throughout his interactions with the group, was himself a member of the near-enemy camp, and convinced bin Laden to give Zarqawi $5,000 to set up and run a training camp in Herat, Afghanistan. At this point, Zarqawi still had not pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda and bin Laden. According to a former senior Mujahideen fighter with intimate knowledge of this cast of characters, Saif al-Adil and bin Laden provided Zarqawi with the money and ambitions for a camp in order to keep him from working with a jihadist rival, Abu Musab al-Suri. Al-Suri led a group in Kabul, but ultimately had designs on a larger movement in the Levant, one to rival bin Laden's al-Qaeda. Displeased, bin Laden and al-Adil co-opted Zarqawi with the hopes of bringing him into al-Qaeda's sphere of influence. Despite these goals, Zarqawi retained a substantial amount of autonomy and independence in Herat, while maintaining a friendly relationship with al-Qaeda. When the United States' 2001 Operation Enduring Freedom began in Afghanistan, Zarqawi banded together with bin Laden and the Taliban to fight the soldiers around Herat and Kandahar. At this point, Zarqawi's Herat group numbered approximately 2,000 to 3,000 men. Later that year, bin Laden and his most trusted fighters, among them Zarqawi, despite their ideological differences, traveled to Tora Bora, where they fought to keep al-Qaeda alive. After the battle, Zarqawi fled to Iran and then to Iraq, with the facilitation of his ideological brother-in-arms, Saif al-Adil. Several years later, in 2003, would-be fighters were flowing into Iraq to prepare for the U.S. invasion, and Zarqawi became the de facto emir of the Islamist terrorists in Iraq, leading between 5 and 10% of the fighters, or between 8 and 1,200 men. After the November 2004 battle in Fallujah, Zarqawi's image as a powerful insurgent leader solidified. At this point, he introduced two tactics that would become mainstays of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, just several iterations away from his own group. The first tactic was a deft use of media and the employment of a press secretary. Many battles were recorded and released on Al Jazeera as well as on the internet. The second, more gruesome tactic was the advent of publicized beheadings of Westerners. Nicholas Berg, an American businessman, was the first such victim, and a recording of his beheading was posted on a jihadist website on May 11, 2004. In October 2004, after many months of negotiations, Zarqawi pledged allegiance, or bayat, to bin Laden and renamed his group al-Qaeda in Iraq. Although his group had outstripped al-Qaeda in resources and publicity, Zarqawi deemed taking the al-Qaeda name advantageous enough to form a relationship. The alliance was not without its problems, and it is generally recognized as having been tenuous from the beginning. In examining the relationship between Zarqawi and al-Qaeda core, it is important to recognize that, while each group gained something from the partnership, each group had to compromise as well. In pledging allegiance to al-Qaeda, Zarqawi linked himself to a weaker organization in order to obtain the grandeur of their name for recruitment and funding purposes. While al-Qaeda received multitudes of controversy and disagreements in taking on AQI, bin Laden gained a vigorous organization that kept his group relevant on the jihadist map. An expert on terrorist alliance behavior, Dr. Tricia Bacon, explains her typology for partnerships between terrorist groups in terms of the level of interdependence that they share with one another. From this measure of interdependence, she outlines 4 kinds of alliances: pooled, integrated, subordinate, and reciprocal. Bacon identifies a 5th relationship, the transactional relationship, that happens frequently, yet is not strictly considered an alliance given its quid pro quo nature. The partnership that occurred between al-Qaeda core and al-Qaeda in Iraq possessed qualities of several of these alliance types. Al-Qaeda core, specifically bin Laden and Zawahiri, expected the alliance to be a subordinate one, with AQI giving up a good deal of its autonomy to the parent group. Zarqawi, on the other hand, anticipated a reciprocal partnership, in which both groups retain sovereignty, yet are more integrated than a simple quid pro quo situation. Both subordinate and reciprocal alliances involve a long time horizon, or expected length, of cooperation. What the 2 groups received, however, was neither of these partnerships. Instead, bin Laden was struck by principal-agent problems when Zarqawi would not obey orders, and Zarqawi was faced with encroachment on his precious autonomy. The resulting partnership resembles the 5th non-alliance alliance, the transactional relationship. By 2003, bin Laden knew that his leadership, and thus the well-oiled hierarchical structure of his organization, had been decimated by the United States invasion of Afghanistan. He struggled to keep al-Qaeda core relevant, deeming it beneficial to recruit so-called franchises to evoke the image of a strong parent company. For his part, Zarqawi sought to be the leader of the Sunni insurgency in Iraq, and knew that the cachet of the al-Qaeda name would increase recruitment and catapult him into that role. Given these organizational needs on both sides of the arena, it was clear that the creation of al-Qaeda in Iraq would benefit both parties. While both Zarqawi's al-Qaeda in Iraq and bin Laden's al-Qaeda core profited from the relationship, it is clear that mismatched expectations for the alliance, combined with the ever-present strain from their ideological differences, put their partnership on the path towards destruction. Zarqawi's insistence on targeting Muslim civilians using brutal tactics lost him much of his public support and engendered scolding from al-Qaeda. At the same time, al-Qaeda expected its negative reactions to be effective, overestimating their ability to control AQI and underestimating Zarqawi's need for autonomy. This theme would continue over the next decade, as AQI transitioned into the Islamic State of Iraq, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and the so-called Islamic State, concluding with the final split between the 2 groups in 2014. An examination of the foundations of this split require an understanding of Zarqawi's relationship with al-Qaeda, as has been presented here.